Alright, so we have used the browser, we have used curl, and now we can take a look at how to use JavaScript to interact with an API, or technically a web API. So, assuming you have downloaded the starter code from the handout, we have this very simple API example template. In fact, it's so simple that if we go to our VS Code, if I go to the index.html, that's all there is just one header saying simple API example. If I go to the index.js, it's an empty JavaScript file. And if you go to the style.css, there are no styles because I have no style. But this is not about my style, this is about actual JavaScript and how to interact with an API. Now, there's a couple ways that we can do JavaScript requests to an API. The JavaScript web API has its own fetch function, which is part of JavaScript itself. So, for example, if we start typing fetch, we have it here. What we will use though, and what is more so commonly used, is a library called Axios. Now, the link to Axios is in the handout. And if you go here, you have so many ways on how to use Axios. Now, since we are not on Node yet, and since we are not using the npm package manager just yet, we need to import Axios, or actually we need to include Axios in our JavaScript file. Meaning what? Our small program needs to know that we're using Axios. So there's a CDN from JS Deliver, there's an unpackaged CDN. All that we're saying here is, hey, go here and grab all of the things that we need to use Axios. And I'm going to include this here now into our index.html. Now this is important. This should go before our index.js because we want to import this before. Now again, there will be better ways of doing this. We're taking baby steps. This is just one way of doing it. This is the way to do it for now. So now we can actually use Axios. And how do I know that we can use Axios? Well, let's see if I console.log Axios in our JavaScript file, and we go back to our simple API example, and I'll open up a JavaScript console here just for fun. And I will save this here, and I will reload here, and we do have index.js, we have a function here. So this is for return apply arguments, but we know that Axios is there. Long story short, now if we did not have it here, let's see what happens if you don't have it here. If you don't have it here, and I reload this, we have a reference error. Axios is not defined. Why? Well, because JavaScript doesn't know what Axios is. So let's throw them back in and let's keep it here. All right, so if we reload again, we know that we have Axios. Now, in Axios docs, there's a lot on how to send requests and whatnot. What we're worried about right now, what we're concerned with right now, is a simple GET request, meaning we want to do the same thing with Axios, essentially the same thing with Axios as we did with the browser. So when we open up this link here with the browser, we're sending in a GET request and we're getting back some data. However, our browser is handling this. Our browser, the whole browser application, in this case, it's my Google Chrome, which is handling this request. It's processing this request, it's getting back some data, and it's showing some data here. What I want to do now is handle this with Axios. So how can you do it with Axios? Well, Axios has a lot of documentation, getting started and whatnot, and it has some examples. So one example is through the modules, One example is just how to use it. So Axios.get, and this is just an example. So if our API request was /user, and we set in some params and whatnot, and so on, so on, and so forth, .then, .catch, and .finally. Remember, Axios is a promise. Axios returns a promise. Make sure you review the promises. Promises are very, very, very important within the JavaScript ecosystem. So let's do an Axios request to this cat fact ninja, whatever, cat fact ninja and whatnot. All right, so let's go into our index.js and let's do the following. Axios.get. Now, if we go to the Axios documentation, Axios documentation tells us that we need to pass in the API endpoint into the parameters, right? So what is our API endpoint? Well, our API endpoint is this here. Okay. So we'll throw that in here. All right. And we'll leave it as is right now. We'll leave it as is, and let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let's take it one small step by one small step. We'll go back to our simple API example app, and we'll reload it. Again, what does reloading do? It will reload everything, including running this JavaScript file here. We reload it. Nothing. Well, nothing, right? Nothing, because we just told Axios.get and it's it. We're not really outputting anything. Well, again, if we look at Axios documentation, we can see what to do. So Axios returns a response. We can then console log a response. All right. So let's do that. So we can do that then. In fact, we'll do .then response. And here I will use an arrow function. Again, review them arrow functions. And remember, this is a promise. This is an older way to process a promise. We'll get to the rest in a little bit. And then I will console log this response. And I will try to spell it correctly. And if you go back to this here, we'll load this up. And look, now we have something. Now we have something. We have this object. We have this object, and we have a lot of different stuff. A lot of different stuff. So Axios gives us back a response object. Now, this is why we've said in the handout that this project is a culmination of a bunch of previous material, especially on beginning JavaScript, on intermediate JavaScript, objects, arrays, asynchronous JavaScript, promises, and DOM manipulation. This is very encompassing. So Axios gives us back an object response, and we can click through it in the console. So we have a bunch of things here. We have key called data, key called status, key called status text, and config, request, headers. So let's see. If we have a data key, then we have the value, which is an object as well. And we have, within the data, we have a fact, and we have a length. Wait a second. This is starting to look like something like this here. Right? All right. Let's come back here. Now, like I said, Axios gives us back a response object. This is the shape of our response object. We know we have a config key, we know we have a data key, we know we have a headers key, we have a request key, a status, and a status text. The data key, how about we get the response.data? Again, this is the build-up on previous JavaScript units, object manipulation, So let's do response.data, and let's reload. Let's see what happens now. Well, look at this. Now we have something similar to what we have here. I mean, obviously the data here is different. However, we have a fact key, a length key, and then the value, and then the value. And if we reload again, we have something new. If we reload again, we have something new. Let's try it with a different. Let's try it with CoinDesk. Let's try with CoinDesk. We'll do Axios.get, and we'll paste this in here. And actually, let's comment this out so it's not polluting our work here. And then we'll do the response, and then we will do the following. Again, console log the response, and let's see what we have. I'm a stickler for semicolons, even though in the previous one I didn't have them. And let's reload this. Now we have a new response object, response.data. This data was produced by CoinDesk, so on and so forth. And we have a bunch of new things. BPI. Interesting. Looks something like if we went here and got this here, right? Now this object here is not exactly the same as this object here, because we have to click through it, right? Because we have to go into the data. Let's go step by step. We have to open up the data. We have to open up the BPI, and we had to open up the euro, whatever, Great British pounds and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So we can do the same thing in JavaScript. We can do response.data. Oops, let's do it correctly. Response.data.bpi, right? In here, and let's get the USD price of Bitcoin, right, for now. And this is very important. Spelling matters. Lowercase or uppercase matters. The case matters. Everything has to be exact. So we're going data, BPI, and then USD. All right, let's save this. Let's reload. What does reloading do? Well, this function reruns, because everything just reloads and this function reruns. So let's do that. And look at that. We have the Bitcoin price in USD at whatever time it is right now. Apparently it's $65,000. Cool. We are now using Axios, or technically we're using JavaScript with Axios add-on, the Axios library, to hit this API and process the data that we get out of it. And we can do it with any API. We can do it with anything that we have. We can do it with whatever. Let's see, board activity. Let's do one more example, and we'll comment this one out, and we will do Axios.get, and then response, and console.log response. Again, let's take it from the top. We take it from the top, and we'll run this. Whoops. this one went down. That it did. This one doesn't work. Okay, that is all right. We will come back and use another one. We can use guess the gender based by name. I'll do this one. We'll say that. So now we're hitting this API genderize IO name look. All right, so let's do that. And again, we have this response object. So how do we get to this part here? Count whatever, name Luke, gender male, probability 099 or something like that. So how do we get to? Well, let's work the data, right? Axios responds with an object. Data, status tags, headers, so on and so forth. It's a giant object. So we go one by one. All right, so we go to response.data, right? So we opened up the response object and we have a response.data. We have a data key here. So let's go step by step. Okay, and now we have that. We have very similar to this response which we had here. Actually, we have the same response because it's the same parameters, which with the parameters we'll talk next. What if I just wanted the gender? Well, response.data gender. We save that, we reload, and we have male. All right, that's about that. Now, in these examples, we have been using the APIs without API keys, so they're completely open. Meaning what? They're completely open. They, you put in the address and you get back a response. Now, not all APIs work like that. Some APIs require registration and they require for you to send them an API key just so that you can use it. It's a way for them to protect against attacks, against malicious users, and of course, if it's a paid API, well, of course, you would need to have this kind of like a passphrase, a key to use that API. So next, we will see how to use an API with an API key. Now, you don't need to pay for it because you can register for free, and for all intents and purposes, this API key will be more than enough for what we need to do. So I'll see you next.